2018, where there was a big drive by the name of Project Blue Sky. Unfortunately, you weren't here at that stage, but you missed a lot of parties and a lot of noise, and everyone was running around, and it was quite fun. So for today, I just want to make a couple of administrative rules. Number one, please don't put yourself on video and stay mute so that we don't use too much bandwidth, and at the end of the day, we have an issue that you can't hear us properly. If you've got a question, please raise your hand. And also, I must ask you something, and that is, please join the meeting and it's a type of meeting where we want your input. Don't be scared to say something. There is no stupid questions. It never was. We all have to know that some people know performance management, but a lot of people has never dealt with it before in other organizations. So please feel free to make comments. And if Mr. Nchangazi asks you for something or asks for responses, please feel free to respond. And nothing will be held against you, and no, it won't be against your performance management appraisal as well. So please, today is the day to ask the questions and to understand the process, which follows through in this year and every year, even though this year was a little bit of a problem, but there's fixed dates for everything that has to happen, and you will be part of that process. And also, in the end of the day, if we're lucky and if there's money, it sometimes has a monetary award as well, which has happened over the last 3 years. So with any further ado, I would like to now hand over to Mr. Nchangazi, who will then be leading us through the whole day. I will also be available from the HR side for the day if there's any funny questions or anything that someone wants to say. So Mr. Nchangazi, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Etienne. First and foremost, I think as Etienne has indicated, this is an open session. I think more so because we don't obviously see each other nor in a same physical space. So to complement that kind of a distance, I think the openness of the session, where at any given point in time, you can just raise your hand, chip in with a question. I do encourage comments and reflections because this is not training, which is basically one way. It's a matter of introducing a system which university has adopted, and I do need to be able to establish your level of probably familiarity with performance management system in general terms. So I do encourage anyone and everyone to participate. I think it will be much more interesting in that particular way as opposed to sit back and just listen. So I do encourage everyone to take part actively in terms of the session. I'll start by just giving an introduction in terms of the company I represent and who I am. Sobeto Consulting, more than 11 years in the business of assisting organizations to enhance the value of their personnel. We call them human capital. As you can see, some of the organizations that we have partnered with include Smart HR, New Spring, TMA, as well as GRADA. They are all specific in their own areas of work, and they also provide us with some of the world-best tools. Etienne indicated our alignment with SABPP, as well as some of the SITAs that we are aligned to in terms of training provision. We are excited and we do appreciate an opportunity given by the university once again to partner with the university in chanting the waters as well as navigating the path on the discussion, adoption, introduction, as well as inducting new colleagues on the subject of performance management. Myself as a person have been involved in the industry for quite some time, in excess of about 24 years. of which 15 of those have been in the human resource management space, performing various duties as a consultant, working with different industries. And during that process, one would have been exposed to a number of dynamics within various industries, of which the University of Zululand is one of the clients whom we've engaged with as far back as 2015, when the conceptualization of the current version of performance management system was initiated. We've done a lot of work in the process. I'm glad Etienne will be part of the discussion as well, so that at least on areas where I might not necessarily be familiar, given some latest developments, he can be able to chip in and be able to assist us just to paint the proper picture as to what is happening in the current spectrum at the university. So in terms of documentation, as you can see, there are screens that, there are slides that I'm sharing. I do believe and hope that in time, these slides were able to be shared with you as well. I've circulated in fact early this morning, but I hope you were able to get a copy of them via your email, so that at least as we navigate and walk through the path, we're actually on the same page together. Just on the time side, we were scheduled to start at 8:30. I do know that on my original calendar, or on my original timeline, I indicated 9, so we can just correct that. So we were able to start definitely 15 minutes earlier than the 9 o'clock you see on the screen. So that means as we gain the momentum during the day, we can end some time and probably finish before 1500, which has been originally scheduled. I'm more than flexible for us to make sure that as long as you are able to benefit fully from the session, we can all be on the same page with the discussion. But the timelines that are provided on the screen are more of a guide. For an example, 3 sessions in one day. Session 1 starting as we are beginning now and running until 10:30. And then we just have a body break at about 10 to 11:15. After that, then we are able to start session 2 until lunchtime, which is 12 o'clock for half an hour. Then we come back at about 12:30 and we push it through till the end. The way the session has been structured, session 1 is that it will be a bit of introduction, background, as well as context. And I would tend to be relatively slow when we start with session 1, because we definitely want to make sure that the foundation is solid. Session 2, we then get into the nitty-gritties, looking at some of the aspects, and obviously at the same time try to seek for some guidance for some of the industry best practices and practitioners. And then the after lunch session is when we look at the aspect of what exactly do we have at the university. We go through all the necessary templates, and if it means practicalities and logistics were permitting, it is at the same time that's when we also do practical sessions where we form groups and work on specific tasks and activities which are available on the slides that have been circulated to you. Again, we would definitely like to be with you throughout. I know other people might have other pre-arranged commitment. If you do, you can just indicate so that at least Etienne will be aware that you are probably departing for a half an hour or so, as opposed to just see someone just leaving without any indication. And obviously we'll be keen to see you joining us back once we are finished with other logistics and other pre-arranged commitment you might be having. Is there anyone with any special needs or requirements perhaps that we need to take note of before we can begin our session? I will appreciate if you can just indicate so that at least we can bear in mind some of those aspects. The session is being recorded. That means after a day or two, the video version of what we would have covered throughout today will be made available to you. And that will mean it will allow you to replay, go back and relook at some of the stuff, and obviously should you have any questions beyond the session, and I'm sure there will be channels of us to be able to engage as well as discuss. I hope we go with these kind of arrangements, specifically in terms of timing, and I do hope we're still together. There is a chat functionality, as you probably might be familiar with Zoom, where you can go in and be able to put a comment or any form of indication. If it means I'm moving too fast, you can just go and type. I should be able to see the signal coming up. If it means you have a question that you probably don't feel comfortable putting forward yourself in a voice format, you can just also type there, or any other form of commentary, including when you need to probably excuse yourself for an agent or any form of a session that you probably might need to do. Okay, maybe before we get into the actual workshop aspect, let me just get a bit of understanding. The subject of performance management is not unique to University of Zululand. I'm sure you probably would have been familiar, or you might have come across it in other environments where you might have been. So I'd just like to get a sense on the colleagues we have on this particular session today. What has been your experience in either the adoption or the implementation of performance management in your own respective past? Now, I'm saying past because my understanding is that people we have on this workshop are people who have relatively joined the university in the latter part. In other words, who are new at the university. So that means they had a life, the working life before, somewhere before they join university. I'm just keen to know what has been your experience or experiences as to where you might have been, how the performance management discipline was handled. And at the same time, I'll also be keen to know how you probably, if you have any questions that you expect us to cover today, so that at least we can make sure that we cover all of those. Whilst I allow you to probably come on board in terms of articulation, I'll just put my mic off so that I do not necessarily interfere when you're articulating. So anyone can just unmute and be able to say anything they would like to say, and then so that we can be able to get to know each other better in terms of the background.
Okay, good morning. My name is Anele. My past experience, 8 years of past experience with this process was that it was an unfair process that was biased, that was based on management's unrealistic expectations or unclearly communicated expectations that were based on interaction. So in the past title that I held, we were rated on what you did and how you did it. So what you did was based on facts, your KPIs, and whether you were able to complete them in the time frame that was given to you. The how was more related to how you interacted with the people that you worked with, and if you didn't step on anybody's toes or you didn't confront anybody. So they sat in a room and they discussed you, your character, your personality, the way that your leadership skills, whether they actually trained or coached you for those, it didn't matter. They just sat in a room and discussed you as a person. And for me, that was an unfair process because you could not defend yourself in those circumstances. So it was based on how management felt about you. And yeah, so that was my experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anele. Maybe if we can permit us just to hone into your experience a bit. The first part, as you highlighted, was based on the output of what you delivered, which was factual, right? And I'm sure based on what you are saying, you don't have an issue with that part. The other part was when they were discussing your character. Now, part of what you have said is that maybe they would not have trained you, but they would discuss you. But would you be in the room when they discuss you? If I were to check Anele on the character part.
No, you wouldn't be in the room. So you would actually have an Excel spreadsheet like we did with the university when I did with my HOD. You would have, they were calling it 3+1s. So you'd have 3 targets that were based on your job specification. Your +1 would be your personal development goals, whether they were in line with your actual job or not. You just had a 3+1. So those were factual. Did you deliver? Did you not deliver on whether it was 6 months or an annual target? That was fair, right?
Yeah.
But then the how is, how did you achieve those KPIs?
Yeah.
Right? If you had to land a project, were you able to work together with stakeholders? Were you able to critically, or like, were you able to troubleshoot? Were you able to solve problems and yada, yada, yada? Did you save the company money in the process of landing A, B, and C, right?
Yeah.
So in that room, you wouldn't be there. It would be first line management that you might not even have interacted with. So it was based on your actual line manager to defend you in that room. In the event where maybe in your process of landing a project, maybe you encountered a bit of a problem with hierarchy or authority and whatnot, whether it was justified or not. If a manager walked in and felt that you were rude or you didn't stoop or bow to them, then it would be figured as you are being disobedient, or, and whether that was fair or not, it didn't matter, right? So it would be based on, did you share those experiences with your manager, and does your manager know how to defend you well? And if they don't, then you would get a 3, or you'd get a 2, or you get a 0, regardless of what your KPI target KPIs were. It was always balanced that if you achieved all your KPIs, then they would go on how. And your how was actually more influential than it was the actual KPIs.
Wow, interesting. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was part of the topic that was discussed quite extensively with management of the university when this process was actually formulated. And I'm glad to say during the course of our day, I can go at length to demonstrate, perhaps just on the part of the how it was actually planned to be dealt with, because as you are saying, that was an unfair and to a large extent and subjective element. So let me not put you further on the spot, but I'm keen that as we go along, let us test some of your background in terms of how would the current University of Zululand system be able to probably deal with those concerns, if I may. So you can chip in as we go along, but I'm glad you have actually put it emphatically, because it is indeed part of what we've seen in our trends as we deal with clients, that aspect. Thank you very much, Anele. Another colleague, let us check your own experience wherever you might have been. Please, shoot.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry, it's Enoch here.
Yes, Enoch.
I think my experience over the past, let's say, 15 plus years with the performance management, in most cases, it's very intensive process, but the end result or the output out of the whole effort becomes almost like a very, I would say, useless exercise.
Okay.
Because you will find you go through all these, let's say, quarterly reviews with your staff. And let's say you need now to do, for instance, it's an increased period.
Yeah.
They end up not using the same tool that you've been driving to award people based on their performance. And then sometimes it becomes like a across the board increase or bonus pay. So that to me defeats the whole purpose of the program. Because people want to know if I exceed or if I perform based or according to what you or I'm expected to do, then why then do I have to be paid or compensated in the same way as somebody who perform below or very, very below par? So
okay.
the process should be very ethical, very clear, and also should be a tool to drive the business improvement. Not just to use this because you want to file it and to be seen as a manager. You are doing this process, but the output from this program does not drive performance. So I always have that issue because it's almost like a tick box exercise in some cases.
Yeah. And again, I mean, 15 years is quite an extensive period of what you might have experienced. Part of what we normally ask, and it does appear in our engagement, why is the university implementing this system? Now, on paper, looking at the number of documentation that would have been developed, performance management framework, performance management policy, amongst others, it will show, and it does show why. The question might be, how then the practical implementation of it is in line with what has been planned for? Because if at the end of the day, the end result is the uselessness of this particular platform or this particular tool or discipline, then how is the university benefiting or not benefiting from what it has intended to actually do? So again, as part of what our workshop will cover, Enoch, is best practice. And I would like to emphasize best practice and implementation, or the practical side of it. So part and parcel of what we intend to do here is to equip everyone who attends with best practice, so that at least as we navigate day-to-day engagement, be it as a staff member or be it as a line manager, at least you will know what was intended. As to how it is being done on a daily basis, then it becomes a function of us all, because you would notice that we are part of this whole system from bottom up or from top down. We are part of the system. So from time to time, we will want to check whether are we doing it as it is supposed to be done, based on the framework that we're going to be covering today. But I'm quite familiar at the same time, just to mention, with exactly what we have seen and what we have experienced. We've engaged with a number of companies who just do it for the sake of doing it. But one of the fundamental questions at the same time I would like to ask, which I'm not necessarily picking it based on what you've just said alone, but I'm just trying to paint a picture. What if performance management system was introduced to ensure that we can be able to measure performance? Not necessarily so that we can, and I'm saying not necessarily so that we can just reward those who are outstanding, but so that we can be able to measure performance. Because that on its own is a bigger part of knowing, understanding amongst the workforce of the organization, whether are people performing and executing tasks that can benefit the organization. So if it means that becomes an objective, is there any bearing of that objective as to what then a remunerator element should be or should become? It's a question I'm asking, and again, we can talk about it and see to what extent has our institution perhaps crafted and configured performance management system, and for what intentions? Can we check that as we go along as well?
Perfect, no problem.
Okay, thank you, Enoch. If you can get just two more comments. I know we're in the room plus or minus 20 people, so even though we might not go through all persons that are here, but at least two more comments, that it will give us a good gravity.
Hi, Shati.
Shati, how are you?
I'm good.
Great.
See, my view, and I've also had got a similar run, length of time-wise as Enoch. I'm also around 15 or so years. My view is that it's a very subjective process, whereas the person who's doing the, I'll call it marking, has all the power. So if that person, depending on how the person feels about you, your performance is really not measured accordingly. It all depends on what that person. And what I've noticed is that as the employee or the person being judged, you are then at the end of the process forced to sign on a document that says that you have received a 1 as opposed to a 3 or a 4, whatever the rating system goes. And you literally forced to do this because, I mean, your line manager is the one judging the performance, and you will get whatever the person wants to give you, regardless of your performance, based on how the person feels about you. So, and that's where I've noticed that in a number of different ways where I was on the other side, where I was actually very, my line manager was very fond of me. So I would sometimes maybe unfairly get marked quite high. And then I've had situations where my line manager was very not fond of me. And, you know, you'd get marked ridiculously low, regardless of whatever is done or whatever you produce or whatever you do. So I agree with the first two, with Enoch and the lady, that it's never really a fair process at all.
Shadi, I suppose when you were fondly favored and fondly unfavored, it was not the same manager, different with different moods.
Different institutions, different managers, different types of managers.
Okay.
Yeah, so it becomes a personality thing where if personalities clash, you are bound, regardless what you do, you're bound to be marked down, regardless what you do.
Yeah, yeah. So the question asked by one of our colleagues in our session yesterday is there a way performance management can be independent from a style of a leader or the manager, as it were? And I suppose some of what you are mentioning tend to gravitate towards such discussions. And again, practice is one thing, theory and framework and context is probably the other. In other words, how we do it and how it should be done are maybe two different words, but the intention is to bring both together so that at least, even though we might do it our own way, we will know how it should be done. So part of this session is exactly to bring the two words together. But again, thank you, Shadi, for that kind of highlight. It is a common view, and I must say, and probably university won't be immune from such perspective. I remember when we were starting in 2017, we had a situation whereby employee representatives were saying, there's no way you can implement this because it's not going to favor our members. But here we are, 2020, we're implementing it university-wide, not because some of those concerns were ignored, but because assurance was given to those who were who had concerns about how will this probably, so to speak, target some of the members of the employment community. But again, as part of our navigation, we can look at some of those practical examples, because for me, examples like those are not exaggerated. Some of the people within the university were part of those sessions. We had to discuss, engage, and go through some of them. But even though they're not in the room, but at least case studies of what has happened through the university might be useful, at least for the discussion purposes, so that at least we can get a better picture. I'll take one last comment, if I may, and then we can then steer forward with our discussion. Any one last comment?
Maybe I can go again. Sorry, it's Shadi again.
No problem, Shadi.
I think this sort of indicates why. Well, my view that I had before, it indicates why the best practice started becoming a 360 sort of rating, where you'd get rated by a number of people and not just that one. Because then you sort of get a group of opinions, and you sort of get a better reading of the situation. And I think that is possibly still, for me, it's possibly still the best way, where even your own subordinates get to judge you. Because remember, one thing about reporting is that while there's an expectation to report upwards, you must also report downwards.
Yeah.
So then yeah. So I'd say, so just answering your question, when you're saying, is there a way that you can make it independent of that just the one person's view, make it more objective? I think going the 360 route and making the 360 as wide as possible is possibly the best answer.
In fact, again, you're actually touching on the core of some of what we're going to be discussing and what we discussed. There's this concept which I suppose we are familiar with, which is called build for purpose. You do find situations where people use an incorrect, or should I say wrong tool for a particular function. And I'm just going to make an example. I mean, we all grow up in households where resources might be of limitation, if at all. At the time you need a hammer to do some work and you don't find one, then you take a brick and you do the work of what should be used by a hammer. Now, does not mean that the brick can't do the work, but it does not mean either that the brick is designed to do exactly what we are hammering with. Now, that's what tends to happen to some institutions on things like this. Now, 360 is designed for a specific purpose, and I'm more than willing for us to go deep into that discussions. But there are certain aspects, and one of the colleagues mentioned earlier on that on the issue of output, as an example, 100%, not 100%, but fair enough because it was a factual element. But as soon as they decided to discuss character, it was now something else completely. So whilst both two aspects of managing or looking at the performance were relevant, the question is how was it done and what tools were used. And I suppose, Shadin, your comment as well, 360 will be used for multiple stakeholder input or input providers, but not to discuss necessarily the issue of output in terms of work, but more to discuss the issue of what tend to be observable. We call it the exemplary behavior, and that in the language of talent management is linked to competencies. Now, there's a full spectrum of how this should be done, as opposed to accidentally be used just so that we can be able to append the aspect of just conducting performance. But those are all aspects I'm quite willing for us to go deep and be able to look at, because the university executives, when we're engaging with them, let me just paint a picture if it might help. The targeted time at first to design and implement this discipline was X. Probably I will equate it to 2 workshops. Then we have a system, then we can move on to the rest and start deploying to the university-wide. But due to the level of details and intriguing aspects of questions, the alignment, the configuration, 2 workshops ended up we ended up having to have 9 workshops, because until all the questions were threshed out, answered convincingly, the executive felt that they were not ready to adopt the philosophy or the discipline of performance management. And again, that to a certain extent is attesting to how far did it go to actually conceptualize this and make sure that it's watertight as it can be. The manner in which it is being done, 2020, 2019, 2018, versus how it was planned and conceptualized 2015, 2016, I won't be surprised if there's a little bit of difference, and I can explain some of the reasoning why that could be. But certainly, if the emphasis of today will help us as managers, will help us as employees, will help us as a subordinate, obviously as leaders, to at least have a clearer picture, we'll be merging out to the industry, back to our working desk, working roles, understanding exactly where the difference is. Because what I'm calling for, and what I did call for, is you cannot start a race and stop and hope that you can win. Now, most organizations, and I'm painting a picture of using a race as an example, a 67-kilometer race, Durban to Maritzburg. As soon as the gun goes, you have to run consistently throughout the distance so that at least you can stand a chance to win. Implementing by virtue of having a document, a policy, a PM reference guide, and a workshop without necessarily continuously seeking to see whether there is any improvement cannot necessarily tantamount to success. Now, again, it's a different kind of a language I'm using just to demonstrate the point, but I will use some examples to demonstrate exactly why some organizations intend to, but do not end up getting the required results purely because of how they actually navigate this kind of path. But all the comments raised and questions articulated and reflections made are at least part and parcel of what we can be able to talk about in this session. And if you look at the purpose of the workshop, The workshop does not limit just to say we want to enable each person to do performance management, period. It actually talks about knowledge base in terms of university personnel. It talks about best practices so that we can better adopt. And adoption probably need to be provided in a broader spectrum of foundational information so that you can also be able to have your own form of call to make or judgment to make in the context of how the design and configuration has been. The purpose of the workshop point 3 also talk about an in-depth discussion. And this discussion is not limited to, now that we're in the university, it's only talk about what is here. It talks about the industry practices, and let us employ and see how it is done elsewhere. So that at least in our midst as we do this, we also can be able to check ourselves versus the industry out there. At the same time, this workshop will also cover, amongst others, the issue of capacitating the key personnel within university. And everyone is key in this case, not only the line managers, but everyone is key with that different roles, so that as we roll out this system, at least it will find traction and it will benefit the university, it will benefit the departments where we belong, the unit where we are operating, as well as benefit us as individuals whilst we are in the employ of university, and obviously our own experience as we grow in our careers going forward. So this workshop, therefore, is intended to look at that. That is why our past experience becomes very practical, if not relevant, to this discussion, so that at least we do not divorce what we have acquired elsewhere. Does it mean we need to bring it as it is? Maybe not, but does it mean we need to at least bring the knowledge so that we can test and check how relevant the system is in the context of performance management in a broader sense? So that is just in a short way trying to set a scene. Furthermore, I would like to take this opportunity just to look at certain documents that have been prepared by the university to assist us in navigating this maze of performance management. One of them is a PMS reference guide. Now, I'm not too sure. I know that yesterday we had intended to circulate this guideline to everyone, or this booklet to everyone. If I may just get an indication, be it on the chat or by voice, as to were you able to receive a copy of a PMS reference guide? Was it sent to you, perhaps, in preparation for this workshop? Okay, I will just take a moment without spending too much time on it, just to, I see some comments are coming, which is good. Thank you very much. Zungu, you wanted to say something?
No, I received.
Oh, you received. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Let me just do a quick zoom into it. So I thought I had it opened, but I can see it did not open. Let me just close that. I thought I had it opened earlier on. Let's see. It's the PFM. Okay, so okay. This is a document which was prepared, and the way and the manner in which it is being prepared is intended to allow us to use this as a pocket guide. Now, there are two key sections to it. The first one predominantly covers some, if not most, of the stuff we're going to be covering during the workshop today. The second one, which I'm going to look at just now, looks at certain elements of questions that people normally bring to the fore. And we've created certain scenarios. And in assisting us to maybe animate the engagement, then the university have used an icon called Prof PM. Prof PM is a knowledgeable fellow and a seasoned member of the community who also is able to advise us on certain aspects of performance management within the institution. In other material that was used, Prof PM was also animated as a character, and in some stage plays that was done, Prof PM will come to life and essentially engage, and we'll see him within the corridors of the university. So that the intention of this icon is exactly there to say, should we get stuck on any aspect, we should obviously have someone who can be able to assist us. So Prof PM is that character and is meant to do exactly that. Now, one of the aspects which is covered on the reference guide is just basic terminology. Now, in this case, we do believe that in order for us to talk same language, if not similar language, in terms of this subject matter, it is necessary then to define terms clearly so that even though you might bring the understanding knowledge from another environment, at least in this space where we are at, let it be of consistent understanding. For an example, I mean, you can talk about performance management system. Some other people normally think of a system including just an IT aspect of it. But in the case of the university, this is a comprehensive dynamic framework of dealing with performance management, which include policies, processes, procedures, the planning, the managing, the reviewing, as well as the development of employees. So the terminology in this case is defined as such. And in the implementation of it, we obviously expect that people need not only limit it to just saying, let us do performance reviews. It should cover all aspects, including planning, if I may emphasize, including the understanding of what the framework in terms of governance of the same says, including how and what processes and steps that need to be followed. Obviously, we can look at other aspects. KPAs are quite familiar in terms of understanding what they are. At the same time, there are terms like KPIs. Now, one will therefore ask, in the context of how this has been designed, what becomes the difference between the KPA and the KPI? Because sometimes, and not because people don't understand, but it's easy to use them interchangeably. So in this case, we have then clarified key performance areas or aspect of the job used to determine objectives or goals to be achieved by the employee during the performance cycle. So this looks at output. Now, one of the key terms which I find very commonly used, even in recruitment, is competencies. But if you look at the literature, in most cases, and I'm not saying in all, but in most cases, it's very thin in terms of what is exactly competencies and how they get used into environments. Now, as part of the implementation of performance management within the university, we've adopted a method or a system called TMA method, Talent Management Analysis, which emanate from the theory of a psychologist called Henry Murray. In this method, the university had access or has access to 53 competencies which are available in the library. Now, this library means anyone amongst us all can go and say, okay, there are 53 competencies. Each competency has been provided with a definition, and each competency has been appended with what we call behavioral examples. Now, that means the next time we talk about competencies, we don't only talk and touch and go, we can be able to say exactly what we mean. Now, at a later stage of our engagement, we can then be able to see how a tool called 360 feedback review can be linked and associated to 360, to competencies and why that is. So competencies, for all intents and purposes in this context, these are behavioral skills and abilities that an incumbent should possess or is required in a specific job. I think the underlining operative word in this case are behavioral. In other words, you can mainly observe competencies mainly, and they will have an impact onto the output. But they are not meant for output, they are meant for the behavioral observation within the work environment. We can look at that exactly how then it has been embraced within an institution like UNIZU, or best practice in terms of performance management. One of the terms, performance agreements, and I think in the case we are using IPA as an acronym standing individual performance agreement. There is also departmental performance agreement. There is also institutional performance agreement. Because for the purposes of the university, if university made a clear conscious decision that performance management is not about purely managing an individual, it's about managing the total output of the university. In doing that, then we need to segment 3 levels. 1, institution as a whole, corporate, as you might call it. 2, departmental or section or unit. And then 3, individual. Now you'll see then in most documentation, there will be a performance agreement for an institution, which is led by the VC. There will be a performance agreement for the department, which was obviously led by the HOD or unit head or DVC. Then there will be an individual performance agreement, which is led by a person, in this case, in line with his or her manager. So the performance agreement becomes then a very important tool that a university is using, not just as a tool for individual performance, but for institutional performance. Then we can also look at the aspect of performance, personal development plan, PDP, which is commonly known in most cases as a tool that outlines areas of which a particular person need to be developed, or certain aspects that are required for a person to be developed so that he or she can be able to be equipped to meet his goals, performance goals, as well as objectives. There will be discussion on ratings, there will be discussion on points, there will be discussion on the score. Now, again, these are different, but they're all quantitative aspects of assisting us to be able to see what a number and what the meaning of the number is. So we'll discuss all those. So the reference guide provides that. I mentioned that there are 2 sections. I'm not going to go through each section in detail, but the first one is a context, and you'll be able to pick up some of the similarities in terms of what is on the reference guide as well as what is on the slides that have been shared with you. We go down deep to cover some of that, and feel free during the time of our engagement, should you see something that you feel maybe need to be unpacked a little bit more on the reference guide, and I'm sure it would also be on the slide, then we can be able to pause and when we can look at that aspect. Now, the latter part of section 1, which we are going to be looking at, talks about underperformance or underachievement of performance goals. Now we're going to look at that, and when we look at that aspect, again, the deeper context comes from the framework, the legal framework in terms of human resources. Some of you will be familiar with Labor Relations Act. Some of you will be familiar with Basic Conditions of Employment Act and many other subsequent legislation that indicates and or guide us in terms of engagement with employees in general. Now, Schedule 8 of Labor Relations Act specifically does make provision to discuss what happens if an employee underperforms consistently. What option does an organization have and what they should be able to consider? So we do talk about that at the latter part, so that at least some of the outcomes that can be considered or not considered, at least they should be known that they are available and they're there for them to be utilized in terms of dealing with the subject. The second section, which is section 2, deal with the practical issues in performance management. Again, here we have brought in our good prof to be able to assist us. And in the format of this section is where we look at the challenge, the problem, and with the context provided onto that problem, as well as prof providing a wise or his wisdom in terms of assisting us. And then we can see how it can be dealt with going forward. For an example, if we look at context 1, where both the employer, in other words, the line manager and the employee, for some reasons, in this case, they happen not to know exactly where to start with the process of dealing with employee performance. It's a very broad question. Where do we start? The question is, what do you know? You know, so part of then what we are able to go through is to be able to provide you with all those guidelines so that at least should a question be posed or any question of the 6 scenarios that are enshrined in this document, should they be posed, one should be able to at least have a meaningful contribution to address this question, as it were. Now, at the end of the day, it is not only the line manager who will be superior, I'm saying that in inverted commas, in terms of the know-how and the knowledge of the PMS. Even the subordinates need to be fully informed, because the session today does not exclude either. It's a session for all employees within the university. So whilst we are sitting here, you'll be able to know what is expected from your line manager in terms of executing performance management activities. As a line manager, by default you're an employee, so you'll also be able to know what is expected from you. So there's no situation whereby others get to know more than others, therefore you always have to ask others. However, it is important to note that the success and the failure is dependent on all parties playing their respective roles. So if a manager, as it has been alluded earlier on, therefore use his or her position unfairly so, it is not what the policy and the framework is saying, because there is clearly roles of what a manager needs to do. One of the examples I can just point out is that part of this framework, it does suggest that both parties need to be given an opportunity to rate a particular individual. In other words, on work output related matters, an employee should rate himself or herself. A line manager should rate an employee as well. Only when both have done so, they can then meet to discuss how each one rated the candidate, in this in particular case, the incumbent. So it's not a question of one coming and say, judge me or crucify me. It's a question like a game of golf, if I were to use an example for those who might be familiar. Yes, there's a scoreboard. People do carry the boards in each and every hole and each and every ball as they walk. But each and every player has a scorecard in his pocket. For every shot he counts, he puts it on his own pocket in terms of his own scorecard. At the end of the game, each one takes his own scorecard, submit it. There's a marker, someone who's going to say, yeah, because at least I was familiar and I did see how you play, I will mark against what you have actually put in. But the primary aspect or the primary important part I'm trying to highlight is same with performance management. Line managers got a role. You as an incumbent, you also have a role. And in this particular case, both of you need to be given a chance to assess and be able to provide feedback on performance onto a particular incumbent. Not only one person then coming and superimposing. So that on its own is very significant in terms of how it can shape this discussion. So better be that both parties therefore understand that I'm not here as a manager, I'm gonna just give my feedback and my word is the last word in terms of what I believe. No, it's about both of us because we are in this game together. So we don't only do that kind of engagement at the end, right from the beginning, when we talk about an agreement, it has to be signed by both parties. Because these are the very parties that will also be signing the performance assessment report. So the kind of not only language, but the practice we are inculcating and or promoting already try to bring the level playing field, notwithstanding the fact that some people might have personal issues. Obviously, in this particular case, we don't delve much onto it because that becomes what we call an exceptional case. The norm in terms of understanding everything that should be, we assume that people are able to work together. We assume that people are professional enough. We assume that people are keen to ensure that the primary goal is to achieve the organizational objectives. The secondary goal may be it at the same level is to ensure that obviously their careers are being looked after, not necessarily to maximize the benefit that they can be able to access as a result of certain remuneratory tools and or regimes that the university and institution is providing. So all I'm trying to say is there are certain things that will not naturally form part of the subject, but because we are human beings and we've got power to do so, we'll make sure that we use them to benefit ourselves in the process. But if we then understand the building blocks of what a performance management system is and how best to do it successfully, we'll then find ourselves in a rather safer side of the water rather than on the other side where we then start to manipulate the system as it were. So this particular side of the reference guide then assists us to provide some of those questions, put them forward, and Prof. PM then is able to assist us to navigate some of these dimensions. So there is one set of a document that we would certainly be looking at. The second one, which I hope was also shared with us or with you, I just want to open it quickly. I hope you can see the reference guide on the screen. I didn't even check whether you could as I started going through it. Let me just check the policy. Okay. The policy. You couldn't see. Okay, I see. Etienne says no. You couldn't see the the reference guide. But you did receive it, right? Can I just check that? Can I get a confirmation that it was received? Because at least if it was received, you might not have opened it as I was talking, but at least you would have had it. Any indication that it was received? Yes, okay, all right. At least it was received. I apologize, I should have checked as I was moving screens whether you can see my screen. But we can always go back to it if it needs be, because at least it's a document that we all have. Now I've moved into the policy, and I would like us to make sure that we do have sight of the policy. If you can confirm what is on my screen, I'll appreciate so that I can know what you see on the screen. I'll appreciate so that I can know where we are. Otherwise, I don't want to move on to what is it that you're seeing on the screen currently. I've currently opened a policy for the university. What do you see?
We can't see the policy. We can just see the reference guide booklet that was previously there.
Okay, so right, let me just then do this. I'll just do the policy. Just confirm when you can see it now.
Yes, now we can see it.
Okay, great. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time on the policy. As you can see, it's a relatively lengthy document, 29, 30 pages. I just need to set a scene by touching some of the aspects, which I do believe we'll talk about a bit towards the as we navigate our session. I mean, if you look at the table of content, there's one legislative mandate. I've already made reference to some legislative mandate in terms of HR as to where we looked at to make sure that not only do we develop a policy that will just suit the university, but we develop a policy that is also in line with the legislative framework. The rationale and the definition and acronyms, we've already covered the definitions. And I think one can spend some time looking at the rationale why the performance management policy was enacted, or at least the performance management system was initiated in the university. Because that point 3 will clear a lot of issues in terms of how come, therefore, is not being used for the purpose it was supposed to have been designed and looked for. We're going to just steal that a moment or two to look at that. We can look at the components covered by the policy. We can look at the integrated performance management. We can look at the scope of performance management. That's another important part of the discussion. The scope of performance. Can I just kill this machine in this case, because it's going to cause a lot of noise as we go through. Okay, right. The scope part is very important. Then one of the elements is 360, which is point 9, and then we can look at roles and responsibilities. So again, the policy does give us a very good indication as to where we need to start from. And I normally suggest that maybe that's where we need to start in terms of setting the scene and understanding why it is being done the way it is, as opposed to say, okay, so the university is doing this, at least they are doing it good because, or as making any other assumptions that might be out there. So in this particular case, at least the policy will help us to remove any form of assumptions. Now, part of the legislative framework, as I've alluded earlier on, covers these 7 pieces of law, of legislative guidance. I mean, Labor Relations Act, basic conditions, the Constitution, Employment Equity Skills Development, the levies part, and the National Skills Development Strategy 3. Now, again, we don't necessarily copy all aspects, but we are mindful of what it articulates in terms of management of personnel within the environment. I must also mention, if I did not earlier, that the biggest part of what houses performance management is not performance management itself, but it's talent management. In other words, there is a bigger goal other than just performance management. The bigger goal is to manage talent within an organization. And as part of managing talent within an organization, one of the minimum requirements is at least to have a performance management system. So that is why the element of why it is being done becomes a very important part of this particular section. There was a research, if I were to just deep a little bit on some literature done by, I think it was Deloitte, if not KPMG. Deloitte, I think they do human capital review on annual basis, where they look at the trends in human capital management. I think it's 2018 report that suggested that organizations that tend to engage their employees normally see a minimum of 20% increase in terms of either the profitability or some sort of organizational improvement, depending whether obviously it's a private sector or public sector or any other organization, including NGO. Now, the underlying aspect of the engagement part can be traced to a formidable way of how you tend to set agendas and be able to have those consistent discussions with your employees. Now, it is possible that you can engage employees without performance management system, but the argument is performance management system by its own nature provides even much more meaningful way of engaging. So as you probably might be checking in some of the articulation, it is really not, the end goal is not to say we just want to be able to manage employee performance. There's a bigger goal, and the bigger goal is we want to ensure that the organizational objectives are met. We want to ensure that the improvement of performance in terms of the organization is achieved. We can't do that without necessarily going back to our employees. We can't do that by looking at without looking at departmental structures in terms of how they perform. We can't do that without looking at organizational strategy relevance in terms of this particular subject. As a matter of fact, just a side note into that, when we're starting to look at the policy, one of the questions that was asked is, what is our strategy objectives, or what are our strategic objectives at the time? Even though the sessions as we're configuring performance management system was not about strategy, it wasn't. We had to ask those questions so that we can build the integration and the linkages. Now, the reason why we ended up having to extend some of our engagement into more than 9 workshops is because in the absence of strategy perspective, it was not going to be possible for us to move, because what is it that we were going to be trying to fulfill if we didn't know what is it that's intended to be achieved by the organization? So we had to then move back and say, bring the strategy, let us understand the strategic objective of the organization, let us understand what is it that we need to focus on in year 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the implementation of performance management system. Because in the absence of the bigger goal, it will end up being about people, which is indeed correct, but that's not necessarily was the main intention. Performance management system is not only limited to people, but it's an institutional system. Therefore, if you look at the purpose and rationale to create a culture of excellence, and this is not just about starting with a person, start with an institution, and the culture is an element of strategy. So that means we had to ensure our strategy is in line and conducive to be able to facilitate this kind of culture of excellence. Some of the questions that were asked were, if you were to rate the university amongst all 26, 30 odd or so universities in South Africa, at least the public ones, where does it rank? And wherever it ranks, are we comfortable for it to be a permanent resident at that level? And all of us sitting there as executives and other stakeholders, including senior managers at a later stage, agreed that no, we're not comfortable with a rating. Whatever rating that could be, it was not a scientific question nor needed any scientific answer to prove. It was just an indication as to, amongst all universities, are we comfortable with the level where we're at? And if it means we're not, what needed to be done? And whatever that needed to be done needed to be influenced by our employees, amongst others, starting with leadership, managers at all levels, and obviously employees. So if it means everyone is buying into the objective of moving the university from where it is by 3 or 4 levels up or better, that on its own could be achieved with a bit of help. And I'm saying a bit of help from our performance as individuals within a university. Starting from the gate to the end, starting from a security guard to every single personnel within the university up until the end. That is why the implementation and adoption of the same has been done to all employees. We spent a little bit of time in 2019 engaging general workers on the same subject matter. We had to bring it to their level so that at least they would understand in the language they could, so that they would also be able to contribute to exactly what the university seeks to achieve. So if it means I were to sell a particular a concept, the objective of the performance management system as it is employed within the university is to be able to facilitate an environment that will lead to a culture of excellence. And that culture of excellence is not about trees, it's not about roads, it's not about water alone, it's not about any other infrastructure related, but it's about our mindset as personnel, it's our ability to be able to deliver, it's about the skills we possess, it's obviously about understanding the goals and target and objective of what we need to be able to, so that when we excel, we can all see that we have achieved at least the minimum levels of where we intended to be or we intended to go. So the objective and rationale therefore becomes very important. But obviously, in order to ensure that people do buy in and go beyond, then you need to build other elements. But the primary focus has always been to ensure that we have consistent and fair management system or fair performance management system. So the elements of, and I'm going to talk about the elements of remuneration, it would not form part of the bigger picture of performance management in the current version. We do know that it will have implication, but in the current version, it will not form part of the bigger picture. So as part of this discussion, as part of this engagement, the university prepared another form of a document, which I'm not going to cover here, performance management framework. This is a policy. There was another document, performance management framework, and the framework was intended to outline the longer term vision of where the university is intending to be in terms of the adoption of performance management, because it appeared that we cannot be able to chow this elephant in one sitting. It's too big to be consumed in one sitting. So we then decided to dissect it and say from year 1 to year 4, there's going to be focus areas. And these focus areas, if you look at where I am on page 14, looking at the 3 pillars being work output, job behavior, and organizational values. There was consensus amongst executives that for the first couple of years, the focus is going to be on the work output assessment or work output management. The university and management are aware that there are other related aspects of performance, which include job behavior. We've spoken about competencies. They are also aware of values which are enshrined in the strategy, which also has to be assessed in a way. But for the current version, the only focus will be on the work output. So for the current version, going back to my earlier colleagues' earlier comments, it should not be expected to use any form of a behavior, even though it is seen or observed, it cannot necessarily be used in the current regime of performance management within your university for reasons that it was indicated that it's going to be excluded until the university is at a certain level of maturity and therefore to be utilized accordingly. So already this starts to show us a bit of context as to how did we then position some of these elements. On job behavior, as you can see, we've got various contributors, a manager, a subordinate, peers, customers, and suppliers. That can include colleagues from other departments. That can include external stakeholders. But we are using a tool called 360 feedback system or feedback method to do that particular aspect. Not only that, but on organizational values, the organization has got about 5 values that are available in the strategy. And I did mention the other day that as you were driving into the university gate on the main road, at one stage there used to be pillars of electricity with posters whereby each one of the executives had a value that he was trying to emphasize on creativity, innovation, and all those. Those are values. The question is, do we just ignore them when we deal with performance? But if we then bring them to the fore for them to be utilized, how do we essentially ascertain that? Because it cannot just be depending on who is sitting in the room, therefore those voices will count the most. It has to be done in a systematic way to eliminate the subjectivity part. So, but if you look at the policy, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, it then assists us to be able to see and probably cover a number of aspects of exactly how this is intended to be done, notwithstanding the fact that I've mentioned that there is a performance management framework which provides a longer term perspective of how we bring other elements of performance management over the years, be it 10 years to come, starting from year 1, 2, 3, and 4, year 5, 6, and 7, year 8, 9, and 10. Where do we see ourselves in terms of maturing in terms of the adoption of performance management. So these documents, this policy is a document available and should be accessible to everyone, as well as the reference guide should be available and accessible to everyone, including the organizational strategy should be available and accessible to everyone. So at least from that point of view, when we start to engage on the subject, it is not just about me and my employees who's supposed to be assessed or managed in terms of performance. It's about institutional. Now, having said that, I'll go back to my slides, but I would love and like to take a bit of views and reflection on what I've just painted as a picture, because it talks more about why we are doing this at the university as just opposed to say, okay, we're just implementing performance management. I would like to take some comments and perspectives. I saw Makwaza. I thought your mic was on. You wanted to say something? Anyone who wants to just to make a reflection on what has been covered thus far, talking towards why the university is adopting performance management or intending or implementing or rolling out performance management system as a starting point. Etienne, if you are still there, would you like to chip in perhaps and add? Colleagues, are we still there? Give me some signal just to get to know that at least there are still people whom I'm with on this particular session.
We're still here.
You're still here. Okay. Let me just check the chat. Any reflection? I think the part we are at is quite crucial to at least give us an indication of why, as we might have expected to have a better understanding of the university context. So just a reflection on how the explanation of the why is coming across. Is it something perhaps one can be able to say, look, I don't buy into it completely, it doesn't make sense, or I understand it, but I need some further clarity on some, or I'm not too sure whether I'm following on the rationale at least. That will help me to at least know where we and how we're internalizing this. Okay, all right. I think let's then proceed. I'll go back to my slide in terms of the slideshow. Just indicate on the chat whether the slide is back in full. As we move to the next section, where we're looking at the best practice for the university.
We can't see a slide. We can just see the reference guide at the moment.
Okay, no, that's fine. It's definitely what I needed, so that at least I don't leave anyone behind. Thanks very much for that. As I move in between, certainly some of it get left behind. Can you see the slide now on the background of PMS rollout?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So let us look at the journey that has been traveled. We've already made mention of the 2015-2016 engagement with executives, where the framework was actually configured to the greater degree. And the mid-year part of 2016, we then got involved with senior managers. And like I indicated earlier on, the university had made a conscious decision not to dump this on top of everyone, but they allowed various levels so that they can be able to absorb and provide feedback where certain corrective actions can be taken to purify and crystallize the system as it was being deployed. So 2016 senior managers, by end of the year, the majority of them were actually had gone through about 130, if I'm not mistaken. And then 2017, it was started to be rolled out onto professional staff members. And that went pretty much with some bit of challenges. And then in 2018, there was a comprehensive review on the progress on the rollout, which resulted to a pre-launch, a relaunch. We call it a relaunch, Project Blue Sky. I'm sure some of you might have seen some of the posters with Prof PM. That's where Project Blue Sky came into effect in 2018 to ensure a proper adoption of performance management within the university. And since then, there's been a consistent way of rolling it out, including launching induction sessions like this one we're having today, to ensure that everyone who comes through the gates of the university does get a proper understanding of why performance management is done, not only to leave that to his or her manager, but to provide a very comprehensive platform, a standard platform, and a formal platform, so that at least we can be able to discuss this subject properly. Now, that's why Etienne said earlier on, anyone should and feel free to say anything during the discussion or during this engagement. No one would necessarily be victimized. It won't necessarily be an interpretation that if someone is asking a question or challenging some of the aspect which is enshrined is rather not supportive of this. No, it will be taken in constructive, positive manner, so that we can be able to see how we can zoom into some of those aspects. So your own experience from previous engagement will become very handy to assist the university to adopt this philosophy, this discipline, to the greatest degree. Now, when I talk about maturity, in most cases, I use a reference to a model, capability maturity model. I'm sure some of you might be familiar. I remember, I've forgotten who's the author or the co-founder of that model, but it's quite popular in most environments, especially in operations, where an organization looks at itself. Allow me just to demonstrate this. I'm gonna leave my slide for a moment, and I'm gonna just pretty much use the blank slide. I'm on a blank slide now. Just give me an indication if you can see it. I'm using the whiteboard. Can you see my blank slide?
No, we can't.
Okay, Neil, thank you very much. I will switch just now. I don't know why my system keeps on and behind. Okay. Can you see my blank slide now? I'm using a whiteboard.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so what I'm demonstrating is the capability maturity model which we have employed in the context of trying to describe, as well outline and indicate the journey of how we can improve within the university environment on the adoption of performance management. So capability maturity model has got 5 levels in most cases, and I do know that we are not only limited to those 5 models, we can basically have any other level, but we have adopted a 5 model system where we use 1 as a level. Let me just make it easy for us. Then it will be 2 as a level. It will be 3 as a level. It will be 4 as a level. It will be 5. The nice thing about this option we are using is that at least you don't get to see my handwriting, because sometimes my handwriting can be terrible if you're using the corky pens on the whiteboard, because sometimes I write terribly bad to be able to be seen. So at least technology allows uniformity, even though my drawing is not as good, but at least I'm able to demonstrate the model rather precisely. So, and then the other side of the graph represent period that we're talking about, year 1. So this is year 1. This is year 2, year 3, year 4. We spoke about a number of years of which the institution would have made some target in terms of where they want to be. So in this particular case, 2, year 3, and year 4. So if we're to do a dipstick measure as to where the university is at in terms of some of the practices of performance management, you will obviously get the level as to where the university is at. That has never been done. Not that it was never wanted to be done, but in our engagements, the intention was never to do that, but was to implement, was to employ a particular philosophy of saying, be mindful of the fact that as an institution, you might be at a particular point. So, and this is not the lowest point you can be at. It is just one of the points. You can be at a very lower point. This is 0 if you want. And I do demonstrate that this could be -1. And so -1. So let me not label that. Otherwise, it's gonna, yeah. So -1, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the question is, when we started or when we start, if we are mindful of where we are, we can be able to say, okay, we are starting at this particular level, but then we're gonna be moving to a particular level over the period of time. Now, you can easily plot this graph in any way, form, shape, or type that you would be able to use as a plan for the institution. Because the university might say at the end of year 1, we would like to be at level 1, depending where it started. At the end of year 2, we would like to be at level 2. At end of year 4, we would like to be at level 3. I'm just making that as an example in terms of maturity. So what I was alluding to earlier on is that if you're gonna implement performance management and stop right there, and just stop right there are 5 levels of maturity. This level, we call it chaos level. This is a level which we call chaos. At this level, the institution is by no means crystal in its implementation or adoption of performance management. So what needs to be done for an institution to migrate up in terms of adoption of this performance management system? And these are some of the questions that during our engagement, we had to look at and discuss to say, so this thing is not just about us agreeing to adopt and leave it there. It's about us agreeing and also embarking onto the process to migrate up. So at a given point in time where we are at a certain level, and for demonstration purposes, I will use a level 1. But in 4 years' time, we should be at level 3.5, if that is acceptable by our senior leadership, as they are the stewards leading this institution. The question is, what are we going to be doing to migrate from level 1 to level 3.5? And as long as we are still standing in one position, we shouldn't expect any new things to come differently. We shouldn't expect any improvement. So the improvement will be borne by our ability to migrate up this particular path until we arrive at that particular juncture. Now, if it means we are at the chaos stage, now chaos stage is where you see a lot of subjectivity. It's where you see a lot of things that some of my colleagues described earlier on as not favorable or dependent on the manager and so forth. But if you look at the level 5, is where you see things like systematized. At the systematized level, it's a well-oiled machine in terms of the adoption of this philosophy. So one of the things that I'm saying is that you will never be perfect at your best stage as a person, as an institution, in this context, in adopting performance management. You will only be better and improve as you navigate up as part of your growth. However, if you are not conscious of your growth and you don't intend to put any effort in improving, you obviously will be an institution that is growing in years, and the adoption of the philosophy has been done for a number of years, but the level of immaturity would have remained at a stagnation. So for us to be able to adopt and improve, there has to be some effort that needs to be put in. Now, obviously, for the purpose of the workshop, as we are embarking on it, I'm not at liberty to cover all the elements and aspects of what will be done in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5, because during our engagement, we did not get to such. But as part of the university leadership, they're supposed to continue to work on some of these so that at least they will be able to share with the wider community as to where they're going to be in which period, so that we can be able to migrate up until level 5 in a particular time period of the existence of the university. And obviously it can happen that probably we migrate to level 2 because of the influence of some leaders and the commitment of some executives. And if things change, we can probably become worse off and go back to level 1 or even minus. So these things are not static. These are not permanent titles you earn. These are temporary titles based on your effort that you put. So all what I'm saying, based on the original comments made, not towards the university as it were, is that anywhere where you will be, if you were to adopt performance management and just be stagnant in that position, it might end up just being a word of mouth, or it just end up just being a lip service, as opposed to it yielding the necessary outcome or necessary outputs that is required in a particular institution. So I'm therefore calling, and this is a call I made to the executives as we're engaging, to say, be mindful of the fact that the system on its own is designed to assist. The manner in which it is utilized, the manner in which it is adopted over the period of time, the manner in which university becomes conscious as to how it improves the adoption and implementation of it would be rather more influential, or rather more important, or rather more relevant as to what becomes the results of the usage of this particular system. So it's not a plug and play and then you just leave. You still have to put some effort to ensure that this particular system is utilized and benefit the institution as it were. That's why then the parameters of defining why this version, what is the subsequent version, and what ideally the university need to be looking at, so that at least when we're at a well-oiled machine level, which is a systemized level, there's smoothness. Everyone understands. Everyone has instilled the mindset of objectivity. Everyone has instilled the culture of excellence, and everyone has instilled the culture of university comes first. Everyone has instilled the culture of customers. Everyone has instilled a culture of a bottom line. Everyone is still many other elements that will signify why and how do we measure and determine the excellence in the institution, as opposed of saying, I just want to do this as part of ticking off the box. I just want to do this so that I can just finish my to-do list. I just want to do this so that I can make sure that I give feedback to these employees, or any other form of minute, if not unnecessary administrative burden that we might be given as part of this process. So it's very important then to have that as a picture, because the dragging and the extent of how far we had gone to discuss was informed by some of these things. And it would have been probably useless, if not unuseful to us, if we're just going to say, give us a system, let us implement, and that's it. This system will be made to succeed or fail by us. This system will be made to succeed or fail by the manner in which we change our minds and probably all propel towards the same direction of exactly what needs to be achieved. So the reasons of why performance management system, the reasoning behind the rationale as we shown on the policy, and this particular slide is being shown, are exactly at an institutional level to ensure excellence in our institution, to challenge our levels if we're to be compared with our peers, and to take a full, clear goal and objective of saying we can be better. And if you look at some of the examples in private sector, you do find some of where these obviously would have been implemented, so that at least the organization would be able to achieve its goals and objectives in a way and a manner. Does it mean then they would have done it perfectly? Not necessarily, but at least they try by all means to use and implement the system for them to benefit from the usage of the system, as opposed just to use the system as a punitive measure, or to penalize, or to use it in a way and a manner that will just settle some scores. So for the university, at least with some of the documentation presented from the policy and some of the background of how it was done, I am quite comfortable, and this is me probably putting it out there, I'm quite comfortable that at least there was a very clear process of thinking through why it needed to be done and why they're doing it. So now let us look at this short video. And after this video, I would like us to perhaps have a short discussion on it because we'll be approaching our tea break. So it's a very short video on the importance of employee performance management. And we have employed some material from a foreign company. So it will at least give us a perspective of how they articulate it and see how are we aligned to it. So before the video starts in full, I'll just start it short and stop and check whether are we picking up the audio one and whether are we picking up the visuals so that at least we can all be in sync with what we see. Feel free to take some couple of notes so that at least when we finish the video, we can then just do our own observation. What did you observe? What are some of the things that we believe maybe are key? What are some of the things that maybe we're not familiar with, but they are being seen there? And what are some of the things that we believe need to be embraced by the university, at least based on what would have been presented on that video? Are we fine with that? Let me see whether technology will adhere to our demands.
So what is performance management anyway?
Okay, so let me just check whether we can see the video. If you can just indicate whether you can see the video, pick up the audio. Can I get a signal?
We can just hear the audio, but we can't see the video.
All right, cool. All right, I can see on the chat as well. Thank you very much. Only audio. All right, I'm gonna do a stop and I'm gonna do a share. Hope you can see it now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so let's hit it.
So what is performance management anyway? Well, performance management should be seen as a set of interactions between a manager and their employee over the course of a business year. The purpose of performance management is to focus and motivate high performance. Why is performance management so important? Well, there is a direct correlation between management behaviours and activities, employee engagement, and business profitability. In short, if you want to increase next year's bottom line results, start with this year's management behaviours. The challenge is, it's very often seen as a process, and it is a process in the fact that it's recurring. However, that devalues the key, which is it's fundamentally about the human interaction between the manager and the employee. So what are the key activities that comprise performance management? Well, it should start at the beginning of the business year with objective setting. Every employee should have a set of objectives which align to business goals. The purpose of these objectives is to give the employee clarity about what is expected of them at work. Once those objectives have been set, it's vitally important that the manager and the employee sit down, ideally monthly, and have regular one-to-ones. During those one-to-ones, you would expect to check in on performance against objectives, but in addition to that, the manager should be using coaching skills and giving feedback and making sure that their employee feels totally understood and has all the skills they need to perform to the optimum. Most organisations choose to do an appraisal of some description, probably twice a year or even in some cases quarterly. It's possible also to give performance ratings during these discussions, which gives a very clear indication of how an individual is performing relative to their peers. To get the best out of your people, it's really important to identify whether they've got any development needs that might help them to be even more successful in their job role. You might meet these development needs through training, but equally they might be met through on-the-job learning, through interaction with peers, or even self-study. Having a career discussion once a year is very important in retaining talent. Just making people understand that you want to know what motivates them will help them perform and stay longer with you within that business. So you conclude the cycle through an end-of-year appraisal, where you and your employee assess their performance against the objectives that you set at the start of the year, and you refocus them on the next year's objectives. There shouldn't be any surprises at this point, because if you've been talking to them on a regular basis, giving feedback all the way, both parties know exactly where they stand, and you know that you achieved the best together. So all of this could sound like an awful lot of work and possibly be a little bit overwhelming. Wouldn't it be great if you had software that led your managers by the hand?
So the latter part of the video is when our video presenter talks about a specific software, which we are not going to focus on in the main on this discussion, because the university, I believe, have got their own system that they are working on, or in terms of performance management. But I'm keen to get your reflections on the first part of the presentation as to how she has actually outlined what performance management is and why it is so important. I'll take your comments whilst I'm switching the screen back to the slide. Are there any comments on the video presentation in line with what we have been covering? Any questions so far on any aspect we've covered? Let me check the chat. Okay, there's nothing on the chat. No questions so far, so clear. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've looked at some terminologies, and I'm not going to go back and look at any further terminologies. They are on our documentation, as we've indicated, reference guide, but the ones that are on the screens are what we've also looked at. Now, performance agreement, not only as a definition, but also as a document, which we're going to talk about most during our engagement, is one part that I would definitely like us to pay attention to, because in most cases, and I've seen this with various organizations, they pay less attention onto performance management planning and then focus a lot onto performance management review or assessment. And it depends as to why. In some cases, people pay much more attention because they know if you didn't do performance management, you won't get a bonus. So that if you didn't do performance assessment, you won't get a bonus. Now, if towards the end of a particular period, be it mid-year, quarterly, or end of the year, then people then climb onto their keyboard and start punching it for the purpose of them to submit. Now, that kind of mindset or that kind of approach is not going to yield any positive result in the long and the short term, because there is only when you find situations where people do it for the sake of, and they start to say, okay, Shadi, what did she say to me? Okay, Nombuso or Niels or William, and then they start to find in the maze of many things that they've engaged with employees over the period of 12 months or 6 months or 3 months or whatever period for the sake of completing the form. That does not necessarily help. And that's not what the best practice in terms of performance management suggests or advocate. So performance management agreement, we're going to spend a bit of time with, because if and when we do it thoroughly, it will actually eliminate all the subjectivities that tend to be applicable if it is not done accordingly. Now, In this slide, we then look at what happens if there is no performance management system adopted. You cannot avoid performance management. Performance management will always be there. In whatever form, shape, or type being done, it will always be there. To an extent that even if it means you don't call it performance management, but we do know, because we've got employees, and these employees have got job profiles, and these employees come to work to do work, and these employees come to work to perform some duties, there will always be a degree of performance management. That is why on the graph, on the capability maturity model, I was alluding to the fact that you can find a negative level, because those people in that organization, they're not even aware that they're doing it. If your boss, your manager, or your line manager, or your supervisor asks you as to what are you doing and how have you done it, or has given you some tasks to perform, that is a form of performance management. So what we're looking at here is, in the absence of a formal performance management system, what happens in those institutions, in those organizations, and in those structures. One of the things you observe is lack of uniformity in terms of the management approach. What tends to count is who is the manager. If the manager is a very vocal, aggressive, task-focused kind of a person, that's exactly what you're going to see dominating the environment. If you see an attitude of domineering, whereby work is everything, nothing else counts. You see a situation whereby managers spend endless hours at work purely because that's how they want things to be done. Regardless of what has been given to you, regardless of what your scope of work is, regardless of what are the basic conditions of employment that could be applicable to you. But just because the manager forces things to be that way, it will happen that way. If the manager type character is obviously a different type, it will tend to, the system of management of employees will tend to gravitate towards such kind of a manager. So lack of uniformity is one of the signals or one of the characteristics of absence of formal or formalized performance management system. That's number one. Number two is very little or no objectives, specifically when we look about work-related output or outcomes required have been ascertained or have been outlined. So the focus is on, we're doing this now. It's not because it is leading to a particular desired outcome. It's just because it happens to be in the level of, or in the realm of agency in that particular line manager or that particular person. So that means the results will be uncertain, boiling water kind of a situation. Just because I needed to drop everything and focus on this, it does not mean the university or institution is going to benefit from that particular activity. It might just be because someone desires it now to be done, therefore everything else needs to stop, kind of a thing. At the end of the day, when you look at the total sum of everything we've done, we were fighting fires. Number three, no priorities to focus on. If you ask 3 managers who sit at the same level of ExCo about what are the priorities for the institution, you probably see different explanations, different results, or different responses. Even though the 3 managers or 3 leaders are from 3 different departments, the priorities for the institution, at least they should be common. Unless if the question was, what are the priorities of your division? Then one will understand if one's priorities are different from the other. But from an institutional point of view, if there are no set priorities that are consistently understood by most, it obviously becomes a problem. Lack of accountability amongst various levels in terms of organizational performance. Again, in this particular case, no one is answerable. If not, most people are not answerable to anyone because everyone is doing his or her own things. And these are some of the signs. Meaning of performance management is not commonly understood. Some people, when they talk performance, they talk, where were you? Why are you not at your desk? Why are you not making tea? Why are you not respecting me? Yes, respect is very important because we're all professionals. But you cannot, by virtue of respect, nail it down to say you did not perform because you did not show any respect to me or to the line manager or to your boss, as the language used, or to any other person within your environment. Performance contract not linked to employee. If there are performance agreements or performance contract, they are not linked to any other formidable document. So part of what we are purporting and predominantly emphasizing and encouraging in our environment is that performance contract need to be built ground up from a job profile. It's not a manager who needs just to tell you what should be in your performance contract. The job profile should be one of the contributing factors. Of course, it can be amended accordingly, but at least if we take a cue from what is already on the performance agreement, on the job profile, we are starting on a very good slate. Because if every employee has got a job profile, at least one can be rest assured that it's not going to be one party is going to instruct, because the performance agreement, so a job profile is available both to an employee and a line manager or any other person within the employee, including HR. So that at least set a scene as to knowing exactly what is expected of me. What we can then do is then to say, for this particular period, 2020, what are we going to be focusing on, as opposed to take all aspects of job profile items which are listed there. So in organizations where there's no performance management system or formalized performance management system, you find some of these issues of performance contract being an issue. Lack of structured approach in terms of results, that result to high employee dissatisfaction. Because of course, I mean, without necessarily having to go down deep and drill, if it means the way you are being treated is unfairly so, if the way you are being treated is dependent on whether your manager likes you or not, in a situation where you are unfavored, you won't be satisfied about the environment. And therefore, if you're not a happy chappy, you're obviously probably not going to produce at your best level. So these are some of the examples of what we tend to observe in institutions where there is no performance management system. At the end of the day, graphically presentation, you see a system whereby chaos results to a lot more negative things happening, which does not assist an organization to succeed, or at least even attempt to meet its objectives. Because there's no alignment, it's about unnecessary competition, it's about unnecessary infighting, it's about many other aspects which are really not necessarily helpful to the organization, as it were. On the opposite side of it is a situation whereby everyone take cognizance of everyone's else contribution. That's where we talk about alignment. That's where we talk about integration. That's where we talk about continuous improvement. That's where we talk about level of maturity being observed. That's where we talk about corrective improvement in many aspects of the situation. So part of the reason, again, why the university is adopting this is because of the second diagram, where essentially we should be able to see the continuum growth. That, at least from the best practice point of view, is what the university has made its clear intention and objective to achieve. So the elimination of this chaos is what the university is obviously intending to embark on. As to what has happened to date to deal with the chaos and to encourage alignment, obviously, those are some of the cases and aspects we can deal with as we look at some of the practical aspects of the university, and our HR partners being our colleagues whom we have worked with as well as walk this path with can be very instrumental to assist us to enlighten on this particular aspect. Okay, the time now is 10:32. So it is time for us to take a body break or tea break. I would like just to check first if there are any questions. If there aren't any, I will allow us to take our well-deserved body break for 15 minutes. So now that it's this time, that means we'll be back exactly at 22. I'm just giving additional 2 minutes in that we've encroached by a couple of minutes into our break time. I'll just check if there are any comments, questions from colleagues.
Yeah, Shati again.
Yes, Shati.
Please go back one slide.
Okay. This one.
Yes, we speak about, actually trying to look at it there. Yeah, point number 6, the linking performance contracts to
job profiles.
Job profiles.
Yeah.
So now you get situations where, for instance, let me actually just talk about my personal circumstance where I got there for a particular role, and then just as I arrived there, There was an employee that then left the company, but well, I don't know what the situation was, but then their responsibilities came to me as well. So it's not on my job profile, but now I'm doing that work as well. And then fast forward comes March 25th of this year, and the president says we must all stay indoors. And then there's other responsibilities that then get adopted, like for instance, the COVID-19 response teams and all of that. So now, how do you then retrospectively right now go back and say, look, here's the contract that the employee had with the university, but here are the additional roles and responsibilities that they've done. So let's judge them holistically on everything. How do you then do it? Because it's not linked to anything, your IPA that you did before.
Correct. So the very first opportunity is at the time of additional responsibility being added, the IPA needed to be amended. If it's not done, we're negating an opportunity for us to have a structured way of observing output that will be assessed at a later stage. Because if you're gonna use the original IPA, we did not have those additional tasks. How then do we include them at the time of assessment? Again, the best practice and the practice on the ground. So the best practice suggests an IPA on its own is not static. It is allowed to be amended. But in this case, you will see when we go down to it, IPA is a document for both parties, both line manager and an incumbent. That's why it is an agreement. A job profile, for an example, you don't have to sign a job profile to agree to it. You sign it to acknowledge it. They don't negotiate with an employee the job profile, because long before you even join the company, they do have a position. When they advertise, you respond to what has been advertised. However, the IPA is meant to be prepared for the year in question. Hence, we talk about the performance cycle. Knowing a person, knowing the role, and knowing the priorities. At any given point in time, should the priorities change or should we add, we then need to be able to amend it. For an example, for the university, just to demonstrate, all KPAs, which forms part of the performance in the individual performance agreement, they need to tally their weighting. We call them weighting to 100%. If it means you've got 5, you will need to allocate a weight to each KPA, but the maximum should be 100%. Now that's number one. The rule of thumb, the second rule of thumb is that on average, 6 to 8 KPAs will be acceptable. In other words, I'm saying 6 to on average. As we matured in terms of adopting performance management, the number will be more definitive. At this stage, it might be a bit wide, but you cannot expect to have 12, 15 KPAs because there is limitation of time and there's an element of the scope of work and the diligence of doing the work, and obviously the level of output that should be perfected to meet a particular KPI. Now, in a case whereby there's a KPA with already 100% allocation in terms of weighting, then you bring another quantum of work or quantity of work which is not defined. First and foremost, you're already launching an employee to probably find himself out of sync or to be out of his breath in terms of being able to do the stuff, because you are not helping in planning for performance. When the outcome of performance comes out to be undesirable, it is because of failure to plan. Shad, I'm not sure whether I've assisted just to respond. We can say
no. Yeah. I hear your response.
Yeah. So it's always a question of assuming we are professionals. One would not do anything just for the sake of putting work under the carpet and hope that one day when you pull the carpet, you'll say, yes, you did not perform, because it's not helping anyone. So whilst other managers might like to discuss that and engage employee accordingly, others might choose not to do it. As we've mentioned earlier on, those organizations that tend to engage their employees openly and transparently tend to see much more better performance in all aspects than those that do not. So part of engaging is to start from the planning part. Lack of it, obviously, we're expecting disaster already. But thanks for that question as well. It does allow, obviously, for us to unpack these things a bit deeper, as opposed just to touch on them and go. All right. Okay. So in terms of our time, let us take then our short body break and be back at 5 to 11. So the time now is 10:38. So we'll back exactly at 10:55. 10:55. Thank you very much.